2, 1. Mark Lloyd, you are the Managing Director of the RMBI Care Co, which runs 18 homes for older people that are located throughout the UK. Mark, welcome to the Care Home Show.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Mark. So the plan for today's podcast is obviously to explore your experience as an operator during COVID and to really unpack what the sector can learn from the situation to make sure that going forwards that we're stronger and that we're more prepared. But before we get into all of that, please, can you just introduce yourself to the audience and just kind of let people know a little bit about yourself and then also about the RMBI Care Co?
Okay, will do, Simon. I've worked in the social care sector probably for 35 years. I trained back in the 80s, many decades ago, as a social worker. My first management job in 1988 was running mental health hostels. I worked for local authority, Greenwich and then Bexley. And then as a provider, I moved into the charity sector where I've worked for 4 or 5 national charities over the last 20 years. The last 4 as managing director. So my heart and soul, and I guess my passion, is being a provider predominantly of older care services. I've been at the RMBI Care Co for 4 years. As you say, we run 18 care homes, just over 1,000 placements. In terms of today's debate, the challenge for me is that our homes are spread across the country. So we're talking northeast, northwest, down to Exeter, Bournemouth, and the London area. So in terms of COVID-19, we've had a full exposure.
Yeah, and I know that you've mentioned that there's a bit of a kind of divide within the portfolio, and we'll definitely get into that later on in the show. But yeah, so 35 years. Wow, that's so you're a lifer then. I think that's fair to
yeah,
say.
I'm 59, but I've not. I hope my passion hasn't diminished.
Well, in the relatively short time that we've got to know each other, I can safely say that you're definitely a passionate individual about what you do and what you stand for. Because our conversation came about interestingly through LinkedIn, which is it's quite a common way to kind of bump into people digitally these days,
Yes.
Isn't it? Which is interesting. A lot of the people that I've built relationships with, that I'm friends with, and that are kind of contacts from the sector, it's been because of a comment on a post or something that's kind of an exchange that's ended up happening off the back of it. Remind me the context of the post, because that particular message that you shared got quite a lot of engagement.
Yeah, I don't post very often, but during the COVID-19 crisis, I have, and I've been surprised at the volume of response. So this particular post has got about 150 responses. And I think all I was talking about was the impact of current media coverage about the care sector and what it's actually having on our sector in terms of negativity. So I think the factual position at the moment is that families do not want to place loved ones into care homes. Care homes are seen as places of concern. And I think whilst the media has been right to report the matters, at some point we've got to get a message out there about how great the care sector is. But I also talked in that post about the first steps. So for me, it's been about how do we get relatives back into contact with their family members within our care homes? How do we get back to unlocking, which I think is going to be a far more difficult debate than the original lockdown.
Definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? I think the media portrayal of the social care world has been very, very mixed. One of the things that I think about quite a lot is just purely just from a cadence perspective, because there's been some good quality objective journalism that's been, I think, where possible, has kind of tried to shine as much of a positive light on the sector as possible. There's also been some really, really poor, sloppy journalism that just kind of makes you roll your eyes a little bit, because it's there are so many mistruths and so many things are taken out of context, which is really so unfortunate. But I think you're right. Because of the volume of the content that's actually out there, it's difficult for a family member to be in a set of circumstances where they feel really comfortable about a loved one moving into a care home, and that's something that, as a sector, we need to do quite a lot about. So I know you and I have explored that in a bit more detail when we discussed the other day, and I'm sure that some of those conversations will come out in today's discussion. So tell me, so from an operator perspective, tell me about your experience of COVID to date.
Well, on my LinkedIn account, I've actually changed my profile, and what I now say is that I'm learning to be a leader during COVID-19. And I don't think anybody, doesn't matter whether you're a manager or a care worker, nobody has any experience of this terrible virus and what it's done. So the very fact that our care staff are having to work in a situation with residents who may have COVID-19 is putting tremendous pressure on those individuals. For me, from the start, I created a COVID-19 group in my organisation, and we've tended to speak 7 days a week, every morning, to review the impact of COVID-19. And I'm pleased to say, at the moment, sitting here, that we did act very early. So going back to the early days of March, which seems a lifetime ago, we did introduce good PPE supplies privately. I'll come back to that if I can. And we made those difficult, tough calls about the footfall and the visitors coming into care homes. So we stopped families and friends very early on. And I have to say, families have been absolutely tremendous and supportive of our actions to date. We've faithfully followed Public Health England and Public Health Wales guidance throughout this process and introduced new protocols. But as you say, I mean, very crudely speaking, our homes in the north have had challenging times, and some of our homes in the south have had some issue with the virus, but I've still got over half my homes COVID-free. We've had around 100, 105 residents diagnosed with COVID-19 in that time period. Probably about 33 deaths, focused on 3 or 4 key homes. I'm pleased to say about 39, 40 residents recovered.
That's great.
And you're talking about people predominantly 90 plus. Those types of stories aren't in the media to the degree they should be. We've had about 20% of our staff tested so far. So I have 1,500 staff, so about 20%. And I would say about 100 of my staff have tested positive, many of whom have been away, been in isolation and come back to work.
Sure.
But I mean, again, the whole testing debate is late in the day. What we really need is rolling testing and well documented in the media. So as an organisation, I think we were incredibly responsive. My home managers have been amazing. I think what our staff have done, that their dedication, their commitment, have been quite extraordinary. And I think the camaraderie that's come out of this is something that I will remember. But nonetheless, there's some very difficult, harrowing stories within what I've just described, particularly in terms of protection and how we've worked with statutory agencies.
It's almost like it's such a, if you look at the kind of the whole narrative about the sector, it's so mixed, isn't it? Because you've got the human cost of all of this is unavoidable and so sad, you know. It's difficult to kind of get away with that, especially where you've got people who are dying quickly, and where people aren't able to kind of the care teams aren't able to provide the beautiful death that they ideally want for their residents, which it must be really, really tough. And then on the flip side of this, you've got these absolute heroes, and I mean, I'd say that with every ounce of sincerity, like absolute heroes that are just working like Trojans in such difficult sets of circumstances, and it's incredible to see. It's incredible to hear.
Well, we created a video news story called KST, Keeping Strong Together, and we run it every week internally. And basically, it is videos that are sent in from the staff teams. And I know our staff look forward to seeing the video. And it's been a really good means of communication. And we'll probably talk about it later, but I think the advent of Zoom has been fantastic in terms of myself personally being able to talk to all staff in the organisation on a regular basis. the big debate for me is that by following the public health guidelines, we need, as an organisation, 25, 30,000 masks and gloves and aprons per week, and we're following the basic guidelines. So, as a charitable organisation, we've expended probably in excess of £750,000 just to cover that cost. I would say about 10 to 15% of our stocks have come through the government supply chains. But if we hadn't made that commitment to spend that type of money as a charity, it would not have given the safety and confidence of our staff teams to work. And I'm just saying that as a fact. I'm not looking to make any other point, but that is the reality that we faced, as many other providers have as well.
That's an interesting point. It'd be interesting to explore that, just to see kind of essentially the financial implications of acquiring all of the necessary PPE, and almost to get an understanding of kind of what percentage they've bought for themselves and what percentage it's been possible to acquire through the government, because obviously there have been of course supply chain issues and the dramatic increase in the cost of the PPE itself.
I've become an expert at logistics. And I mean, there's some bigger debates that I hope we come on to shortly. But I mean, how long do we go on providing PPE? It's an interesting question. Now, what point in the future do care homes not provide PPE? Certainly, one of the learnings for me is that whatever the status of the virus, which hopefully will be gone, I will make sure now that I'll always have a supply of PPE for the future.
Yeah,
and that's just a reality. One big learning.
Yeah. On that note then, okay, so what observations do you have, I guess, now that we're starting to regain some level of normality? And I'd say that with, again, it's some level of normality, because I think we're still very much in the thick of it broadly, but what observations and what are the kind of key lessons that you've learned, I guess, kind of personally, and then also kind of from an organisational perspective?
I think before we went into this crisis, again, the state of the social care sector was well documented. And most care providers will tell you that they need to operate around 90% occupancy to be a viable business, be they commercial or a charitable organisation. I think we've had an earthquake, and I still think there's a tsunami to come to our sector. That I think the financial funding and structure of our sector is going to be seriously challenged. Certainly, looking at our occupancy, and I noted HG1 published an article, or rather Lang & Wiesman did a week ago, about their status. You know, we expect our occupancy to drop by about 20% in this crisis, primarily because people do not want to come into care home at the moment. So I do think going forward, there's a wonderful opportunity or a seminal moment for our sector, which I'll come back to later, about how the sector is reshaped and how we encourage people to come back in. But in terms of the practicalities of the moment, I think there's a viability issue. There's a triangle for me. There's the viability on one side for care operators. There's a whole safety issue for residents, for staff, and indeed for families that we all know about. But I think there's a third part of the triangle that isn't being talked about, which is the general well-being of residents. I think the isolation, the loneliness, being distant from loved ones, you know, using Zoom like we are today, is a poor substitute for families having that family contact. And I one of my worries really is about the mental health and the well-being of many residents in care at the moment. So we talk about the virus, but I think there's another side of this triangle, along with viability, that we haven't really started talking about in the media yet.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I guess as this, we've just come out of Mental Health Awareness Week. It's been something that I've been giving quite a lot of thought to, and the way that I conceptualize this is. So, and this is for everyone. This is the 7 billion people of the world that have in some way, shape or form been affected by this. So if you've got if you've got zero, basically if you were to put mental health on a spectrum, and if you had 0 as happy as Larry, and then 10 as being kind of, I guess, like an imminent suicide risk, most people probably spend most of their life somewhere between a 0 and maybe a 3. Maybe if a 3 is like maybe a bad month rather than a bad week, but that's kind of normal times with no kind of predisposition to mental health challenges, or in a set of circumstances which is not conducive to good mental health for whatever reason. I think even the most comfortable kind of stoic people, because of the extremity of the set of circumstances that we're in at the moment, are probably averaging a 2 or a 3 at the moment anyway, just because of the pure anxiety of the situation. You then put the people who are more exposed, that have got predisposition to mental health, people who are on the front line, residents in care homes who aren't seeing their family members and stuff like that, and that you're getting to a worrying level of mental health. And I think you're absolutely right. That's probably the thing that I'm most worried about off the back of all of this. There's going to be 3 big costs. There's going to be the human cost, there's going to be the economical cost, or the economic cost, I should say. But the mental health cost of this is going to be significant, and it's going to be here for it is going to be here for far longer than the virus, it would appear.
I know. I think you're right, Simon. I also think, we haven't touched on it yet, but I think the mental health of the social care workforce will be immense. I think people can work as heroes and they can go the extra mile, but they are seeing some terrible things across the sector. People are working long hours and not having holidays. So we need to see. I mean, as an organisation, we're doing quite a lot of work around compassion fatigue at the moment, and we're trying to look at how we support our staff. But I'm under no illusion that when hopefully we're out of this crisis, we will have a new set of issues. But maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I do think there's opportunity here, because I do think our sector has to press the reset button. It has to look at how it operates in the future, and the world will be different. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for government, local government, the regulator and providers to look at more of an open relationship. I think one of the consequences of having a common enemy is that people have united. So if I take CQC, it's been a tough regime in the last few years for all providers. And I would accept they've raised the standards. I'm qualified to talk as we have outstanding and good grades in our organisation. But I'm actually really pleased in the last 2 weeks that they started doing virtual interviews again with home managers. But the key point I'm making is that they're working with us. And I think there's an openness at the moment that the regulator, I hope, will continue to have, that I think government and local government need to take on board. In my 35 years career, I've seen many initiatives kicked into long grass by different governments, and one thing I've learned is that a single-term parliament isn't able to sort out social care funding. We came closest with the Dillnot Commission back in 2015, but I really do hope that there is a serious review about how social care is funded in going forward. We've already touched on the implications of the crisis on the financial well-being of the sector, but the fault lines were there before the crisis. And I think the public perception has changed. We have got visibility now. We obviously have the clap for carers. I think the NHS and social care together have a tremendous opportunity, but it needs all key players to remain open to how we rebuild our sector. So I think I'm hoping it's going to be a watershed moment when we're through this.
I guess if now is not the time when the reform that people have been looking for so long happens, like what does need to happen for that to be achieved? I mean, I've been in the sector a comparatively short amount of time in the grand scheme of things, but I know from people who have been in the sector their entire professional lives that it's the same issues that have been kind of been going around in circles for several decades now, and it's like, okay, so if not now, when?
Well, I guess I mean I haven't, as I said at the start of the interview, I haven't lost my passion, and I think for me it is all about well-being. It is all about being innovative in how you deliver care, and I think you have to work within the parameters that are set. And for me right now, I mean, looking at how we get out of lockdown, for example, we'll need a lot of imaginative thinking. So I think it's York Care posted last week a design of a room that they split in two with a sheet of perspex. Now, the point is, I mean, some people might say, well, that's not the right thing to do, but the point is, it's innovation. There's some Danish designs out there on pods. And if you think about it, right now, how do we start that debate about relatives coming back into care homes? You know, we talked about when does PPE end or continue until? How do we give confidence? There was a survey last week that I noted on Breakfast TV that 95% of residents in care homes feel safe, which is important. And certainly we take part in the annual Your Care ratings that are independently, which verify those sorts of ratings. But at the moment, we've got to get over the barrier that care homes are unsafe. So at the moment, one of the things I'm doing is we're looking at how we use, in this great weather, gazebos and tents and portaloos. How can we facilitate families coming back into the gardens maybe in a planned way? We haven't started that process yet, but we're doing the planning. You've got debates about isolation. Why would you come into a care home at the moment if you've got to go into 14-day isolation and then you can't see your family? So we're going to have to look seriously at how do people come back into care homes? How do you reduce isolation? So these are all debates that all providers are going to have to grapple with in the coming weeks and months. And there are no easy answers to these questions.
The word that you used earlier that I think that people are going to be kind of partaking in, whether they use the word specifically or not, is going to be innovation. It's going to be, how do we address the set of circumstances that we're presented with, and what can we do about it in a practical and safe manner? It will be fascinating to see how operators do respond to this, because it's such an unprecedented set of circumstances, and I guess because of the cruel nature of the disease itself, how you get around people not having kind of normal interaction, but doing it in a way where people can still at least see their relatives, and to be able to maybe you don't get a hug, but maybe you get an opportunity to sit and chat and to be able to catch up and to at least have a 3D experience of someone. As you say, Zoom calls are great in as much as you get a 2D experience, but we're humans are neurological kind of neurologically we're designed to have proper communication and proper interaction with people, and that's again coming back to the mental health side of things as well. That's where a lot of this, I guess you'd call it, kind of a deficit has come from, that's making people feel just not so great about what's going on at the moment. So it's looking at those innovative ways that you can get the most out of the situation in a positive and really constructive way as possible.
Well, I mentioned earlier, I mean, I've been absolutely amazed by families that we work with. I mean, one of the things that we've really focused on is good communication. So we've written on a regular basis to family members. We've responded quickly on email comments, and I think families do understand. But your point about handshakes and hugs, I guess for all of us is it going to be a debate, let alone within care homes. But I think I recognise as a care provider that the sooner I can facilitate relatives having contact again with residents of care homes, the better, because I'm very mindful of the mental health issues. I mean, we've got scores of tablets and iPads and all the rest of it now. We've had donations from various people. So the level of technology is great, but it's not the same thing. as you quite rightly say. It's not. It's a different form of communication.
So, how and when, in the context of kind of unlocking, how and when does the sector go about kind of regaining any level of normality, do you think?
I think that's a very difficult question, because you only have to look at the politician debates at the moment, and everybody's got a different view, as do different countries. And the way I'm looking at it is, I'm pleased to say that our numbers are going in the right direction in terms of fewer COVID cases now, which is really good news. I still think the care sector is a good month behind the wider community in terms of the trends that we're seeing. So I still think we're a good month away from a debate about moving out of lockdown. Certainly there's been more pressure over this bank holiday weekend with families wanting to come in because of the nice weather that we've currently got. But I'm waiting on Public Health England and Public Health Wales to give clear guidance, because they have a duty to do that. But like of every aspect in this crisis, we've got on and acted. So we've acted on PPE, for example, and we're acting now. So we're doing the planning work now. We're having the debates about isolation. We're having the debates about the longer term use of PPE, and we're having the debates about how do we facilitate initial contact. So the idea is, like the Perspex rooms, we are looking at. We're being proactive, but I want to be in a position where, on the day that there's guidance given by our regulators, by Public Health England or Wales, that we can move on that day. So I think we're doing the research, and as a provider, I think that's the responsible position to be in at the moment. And I think families recognise that. They know that we're trying to facilitate this. So simple debates, residents wearing masks. We talk about staff wearing masks, but residents wearing masks, it gives them greater freedom. You know, how do you facilitate families meeting? You know, do you trust families? Do you have to keep people apart? You know, how do you maintain social distancing? All these debates have to be looked at. But all I'm saying is, you've got to be proactive and you've got to be ready. You know, we've got homes that are COVID free. So quite rightly, families are now saying to us, well, why? But equally, we have homes where we have had COVID. So it's a difficult debate, and it won't be easy to unpick. But it's about being a responsible charity and being prepared to move when we can.
I guess that comes back into what you mentioned earlier about your updated LinkedIn profile around learning to be a leader during COVID, because it's all a learning experience, isn't it? Because everything's so new and so different. It's just trying to think pragmatically, and albeit you can take baby steps and you can try and put in as many provisions as possible, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that you're going to get it right all the time, which I think, when getting it right can have such implications. It's the need and requirement to just be super careful as from a sector-wide perspective to make sure that that it is such a no, go for it.
Well, one of the things we've sort of walked into is we're now making decisions in a sector, like other sectors are, that are major ethical debates. And if you'd said to me, you know, a year ago that you'd be doing what you're doing now, I wouldn't have believed it. You know, we could be at university sitting in a classroom having an ethical debate about denying residents access from their family members, and you know, we'd have a great and massive ethical debate about all the reasons why it's not appropriate. Yet here we are, and the sector's done it. And there's numerous other ethical decisions we're having to make as care providers that nobody's trained to do. I mean, this is completely new territory. What's remarkable is how residents, families, staff, the regulator, everybody has been so proactive in the crisis, and that's really what I want to focus on. Is that I think it's that openness that I hope we can keep when we come out of this crisis, because I think there's been some incredible work done within the care sector.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, isn't it? How I mean, I've had conversations with people who have had long-term kind of battles with local authorities and things like that, and because of the set of circumstances we're presented with now, it's like, okay, how do we fix this? What do we need to do to make this work? And I know that's not necessarily consistent around the whole country, but the fact that those positive steps have been made, it's great. This is real progress around the integration, because we haven't done such a good job of it in the past. And again, if it's not COVID-19 that kind of almost forces the set of circumstances, then what needs to happen for that progression to be sustained?
I mean, in very simple terms, for me, the Dilnot Commission back in 2015 was the opportunity that wasn't seized, and that would have brought in a ceiling to what people paid for personal care. You can't continue to run a sector over the next 2 or 3 decades, particularly with the volume of baby boomers now hitting retirement age, where you've got a local authority only being able to afford to pay £500-600 for dementia care. You know, what would it cost you to spend a week at Premier Inn? And you have such disparity now between what it costs for somebody coming into care privately to local authority. And it has to be grasped. Politicians have to deal with that issue. You can't sustain this sector. And if you throw into the equation the financial consequences of COVID-19, which we don't know what they are yet, nobody knows. I saw one a poll this weekend which showed that, or rather a research into the market, that we'd be in full recovery in 2 years' time. We just don't know. You know, we could have a second wave. So I think the flaws were in the sector. There's a great opportunity, I think, for the sector to come together about how the funding is reviewed, how we regulate, and as providers, how we take forward key discussions like well-being. I think there's a big onus on providers to demonstrate that they are providing quality care. So I'm an optimist, Simon. I don't want to look back at the history. I think there's opportunity here for everybody in our sector to come together about looking at how we reshape it.
I mean, that's one thing that I have been certainly really pleased to see. We're part of the Care Leaders Network WhatsApp group, and I mean, there's probably 160, 170 care leaders in that group now, and people who have got no real kind of incentive to support each other are helping each other through the process. There's as the kind of the founder of the group, if you like, I find it really heartening to see that everyone's contributing, everyone's chipping in, everyone's sharing and collaborating, and effectively it's bringing the sector together, which I mean I'm immensely proud of, albeit it's not largely it's not my content, it's my channel, if you will. But I think I'm as an organisation, from a kind of day job, from an SP&P perspective, we're all about collaboration. We're all about bringing the sector together. So it's been great to see people trying to support each other so much. Some of the conversation threads that have been happening in that WhatsApp group have just been absolutely tremendous. But it can't just be at an operator level as well. There's so many stakeholders that are part of the social care system, if you like, that it needs to be a bit broader discussion, and having had that broader discussion, action then needs to be taken. Because again, not wanting to step back into the past for too long, but the discussions have been had, the research has been done, the white papers and the green papers have all been written and prepared. Just kind of need to get on with it now, don't we?
Yeah, and I think the current negative media is short-lived. In terms of the focus of COVID-19 on care homes, and that will pass. But I do think that the public perception of social care has changed in this crisis. And, we have been linked with the NHS and other key workers. And I think that is absolutely tremendous. And I think the rating and the value placed on care home providers now is probably the best it's ever been. So I do think we'll move away from the negative media as the COVID-19 crisis hopefully diminishes. But I just hope that we all learn how we work together in going forward, and that we don't slip back into old patterns.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, let's be honest, the media are a fickle bunch. That something else will happen that they'll kind of start focusing their attention on, and it'll be not forgotten as such, but the level of intensity, if you like, will fall over a period of time. And we've got as a sector, we've got to ride that wave. We've had the spotlight put on the sector, and I think an awful lot of good has come off the back of that. But I almost feel like this. I've spoken to a couple of people, and they've almost kind of put this perception across that almost like this is the end now, because we're coming to the end of the kind of the peak of the pandemic. And I'm like, in my mind, it's complete opposite. For me, this is the beginning. It's hopefully of a new era of kind of recognition and appreciation for the sector, and that we kind of need to ride the waves. Maybe not the right way to phrase it. I think we need to create the wave almost as well, and keep kind of pushing it forward and moving the dial on this, because so much positivity has come off the back of the exposures to the sector.
I think as an operator, at the moment, I have to plan on the basis that I may be wrong. And what I mean by that is that I have to plan that we're probably going to be living with this virus for a long time, and whether we have ups and downs and seasonal flux, I have to now plan on the basis that I am going to need PPE, I am going to need access to testing. And I am going to need to have good, robust policies in place around isolation, if needed in the future. And clearly, in doing all that planning work, I'd be over the moon to be proved to be wrong. But I think, again, back to the debate about getting families back in, we've got to be proactive every step of the way and responsible.
I mean, okay, so with that, how do we start to provide families access to residents, and how does that play out? I guess you've kind of shared some of your thoughts around kind of practically the things that can be done, but over a period of time, what do you think that kind of looks like, if you will?
I think there's got to be government confidence in the sector, and I think there has to be clarity in terms of we're over the worst of the crisis now in the care home sector. So obviously the debate has focused on hospitals and it has focused on community. But I think you've got to have that clear steer from central government that the care home sector is moving to a better place with the crisis. I think that then gives confidence to commissioners and regulators and providers. But I would expect there to be guidance coming out that, particularly from the public health bodies, giving guidance to us about moving forward. I think I've already said it earlier, but I think all I can do is to be ready from day one to progress. And I certainly intend to be in a position, certainly within the next month, where we could start facilitating families coming back into contact in a controlled way. So yes, the use of PPE and some of the design models that we've talked about. But I think that there is, quite rightly, there should be an onus on me as a managing director to be getting on and preparing that groundwork. And when that occurs, for me, that will be an absolutely fantastic day.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic day. It's one of the biggest obligations I feel right now that I've got.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, and that will be it's almost like a load off everyone's mind. So each operator around the country and each individual home, as they're then in a position to be able to start introducing people back into the homes, there, so that families can reconnect after what will be quite a significant amount of time after all of that. That will be some joyous moments for people, and long overdue joyous moments as well. So from the family member, thinking about family members for a second. So how do we give family members confidence that care homes are a safe haven? And I guess that's specifically to the there's two sides to that question. So you've got the families of current residents, but then also the family members of almost prospective residents, if you will.
I think it's a really good question. I think today, or last week, I was aware of a couple of referrals that didn't progress, and these into homes that are COVID-free, because relatives realised that if their father or mother came into a care home, that they wouldn't be able to see them. And it was for that was what stopped the referral. It wasn't about the quality of care. It wasn't about, yes, my dad needs to go into this particular care home, is the one we found. It was, I can't see my father. So for me, you have to look at the isolation debate. Anybody coming in at the moment goes into isolation for 14 days, and that has to be, I think, reviewed, and we have to be proactive around how we deal with that. And I think, the sooner you stop restricting families meeting their loved ones, the better. The problem, of course, in this triangle I talked about earlier is, of course, all the time you have to be driven by the well-being and safety mantra. And I've certainly seen myself how fast this virus spreads, and how quickly it can come into a care home. There's been a lot of talk about people being discharged from hospital who haven't been tested, but I would say that I still think the biggest vector of carrying the virus is primarily through staff coming into work. I still think that's one of the primary reasons. And one friend or relative coming into a care home could undo all the work. So I think you have to look at this balance of how you create a controlled environment. And once we've done that, you're then into debate about, well, when can you go to the next stage? Similarly, I wouldn't have a clue at the moment when will staff stop wearing PPE. I mean, that could run for months. It could, is any employee going to feel safe not wearing PPE? What is the new normal going to be? We just don't know at this stage. So for me, there's probably more unanswered questions. Coming out of lockdown is definitely harder than going into it. But I think we have got talking for my charity, we have got the backing of families, and we have to keep listening to families as we do to our residents. So, for example, we had VE Day recently. We took the decision to allow entertainers into the grounds, not into the homes. But actually, from a mental health perspective, that for me was vital. For so many of our residents, that day was a very, very symbolic and important day for their own personal memories. Absolutely. So I think daily you're balancing this safety, well-being. I think every debate you have, that is what you're doing. You're having that difficult ethical debate, and it's going to continue for some time to come.
Definitely. Well, I was about to say done right. There's a question around what right is with all of these things. Of course, I guess that's what the debate that you're referring to. But done carefully and taking a pragmatic view against that balance over a period of time. Hopefully, those decisions will become not easier, but the environment in which those decisions are made will allow them to become easier, if you will, as things do become normal. Again, it's difficult kind of saying that word because you just don't know exactly what it's gonna
what it is.
what it is
Well,
gonna look like. But
I mean, talking about the new normal. I mean, I just wanted to say what have I learned from this crisis? What would I take forward? And actually, I can think of there's 4 things I can think of. Number one, I think as a care provider, we've got to think about what is the offering going forward that families want and residents want to come into care. And I think we've got to think seriously about how do we demonstrate that our homes are safe. I'm talking about safety from the virus. And that's a big debate that we're going to have to look at. I think, secondly, always having adequate PPE. I think everybody recognises that now, that you've got to have good supply chains. One of the ironies for me about the PPE debate has been nobody's talked about issues like provenance and Modern Slavery Act in this process. And I think there's a whole debate about appropriate supply chains, and we've got a responsibility to look at that. Thirdly, expectations of my staff team, and I've got to look at how we acknowledge and celebrate everything that our staff do, which has been fantastic. But I think the final thing for me is the biggest issue, is that the world of work has changed and will change. I've learned that using Zoom means that I talk with and to people. I don't spend my days doing dozens and dozens of emails. So I think one of the benefits of this crisis for me is the means of communication has changed. We don't have to drive to meetings, go across country. We can now communicate, and it's been brilliant as a managing director to have such high contact with all my homes through a crisis. So I think how we work in the future and how we communicate. But why can't we use Zoom to communicate across departments? It's not just us providers. You know, let's do less emails. Let's do more Zoom. So I think there's so much to learn and grasp coming out of this crisis. We're all going to be different people.
Definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. You're right. I think you're right to kind of double down on that particular point as well, because, okay, so an email is a good form of communication, but it's very, very linear. Although Zoom isn't as good as a face-to-face interaction, sometimes that's not possible, and it's not necessarily the best thing to do. I mean, I've been looking at our business, and we're a management consultancy for all intents and purposes. We provide coaching, consulting and training, and almost all of that is done on site, or at least it has been traditionally. And we've gone from almost probably like a 90% on-site model through to a 100% Zoom model, and it's working really, really well. I think my team are probably on a personal well-being perspective, they're in a better place, because we're just not having to travel around the country. There's the obvious cost savings of it all as well, and equally, whereas we might have had a telephone conversation before, which is fine, actually jumping on a Zoom call and being able to see someone, again, it's 2D, but you have the benefit of being able to see what does that person look like, how is their kind of their body language and things, because you only get the 1D nature of a telephone call. I'd like to think, as a leader of the team, that I know my team well enough to know if they're maybe a little bit fatigued, or maybe they're having a bad day or anything like that. But with this richer interaction, and again, it's not perfect, it's not a real world interaction.
So do you think you will change when the crisis is over? Will you change how you work, do you think?
100%. Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I think we're looking at taking our business digital in more ways than one. We're launching. We're basically in the process of launching a cultural transformation platform for the sector, which seems to be the response that we've had from that's been absolutely incredible. And that's an online learning platform and community, which, I mean, we started building that. We started planning it 18 months ago. We started building it about 6 months ago, and we could have couldn't have foreseen COVID, but that's been really, really good. But I think that from a traditional coaching and consultancy perspective, I think just so much of it we know that we can do over Zoom now, and it's in some ways it's actually more effective, because a lot of one of the things that our business is a workshop. If we come and do a workshop for, say, my colleague Sue comes in and does like a workshop with your team around dementia care or something along those lines, it's ephemeral. If we can, one of our values as an organisation is to be results driven, and we try and make sure that people have got slides and there's great exercises, and we try and make sure that people are in a position to take as much from the conversation away as humanly possible. All you need to do with a Zoom call is just record it, and you can go back and re-watch the workshop as well. So I think we need to focus on, and this is everyone, this isn't just the social care world, but kind of business as a whole. We need to look at the opportunities about how to make efficient businesses kind of more efficient, and to work in these new ways, because it's not just, we shouldn't just be thinking about this as much as, oh well, we're now being forced to do this. Actually, it's got real merit, and it can save money, and it can drive efficiencies, and in some sets of circumstances is actually way better than what we were doing before. So yeah, we're definitely doubling down on some of these positives. So
the new normal is going to be interesting.
It certainly is. And I think that counts for everyone, right? That's not just as much as it's an organisation by organisation thing, it's a person by person thing as well. I feel like I've had better communication with probably more important people in my life because of this set of circumstances, because we're more focused and maybe a bit more attuned to thinking, oh, I haven't spoken to my auntie or my cousin or whoever it might be, people that you might not speak to quite so often, but just to check in, and just to be kind. I think that's one thing. If we could, if everyone could kind of take away from this to try and be a little bit more kind as we make our way around our lives.
That's a good word. Very good word. I agree with that.
Good learning for all of us, of course. So what do you, coming back into the social care world, like, how do you view the future of social care whilst we're looking at kind of like maybe individually and organisationally, like what we need to be focusing on as a sector? Yeah, how do you see the future, if you will?
You've got to have an affordable model that's funded appropriately, and whether that's by the state or whether that's by individuals is open to debate. But I know at the moment we've got all the concerns about what's going to happen post COVID-19 in terms of recession, and the government's going to have to raise taxes or cut things. I think there's a fundamental question, I think, for all politicians is, I think would the public pay extra money to fund the NHS and or social care? And social care has always been the Cinderella poor relation, but it is going to fall over. Many of the bigger commercial providers are already well documented in terms of their financial difficulties. We've had Southern Cross. Charities run on very tight budgets, and one thing we do know factually is that the older age profile of this country is going to increase. As a provider, we're also looking at retirement communities, but that's an interesting debate, because retirement communities depend on people being able to sell their properties, if they're not renting, to be able to move in, and banks need to be able to loan monies. So again, we don't really yet know whether that sector is going to be seriously impacted in the short and medium term. So it feels to me that there's the demand, I think, won't go away, but the model remains flawed, and not being a politician, I can only see an all-party consensus approach to resolving these issues. You've already mentioned about we've done all the work. There's been the white papers. There's been royal commissions, but actually, there needs to be an honest debate about how you're going to fund social care. And some of the answers may be unpopular. Some of the answers may be about, as private individuals, we have to pay more. We have to pay an old age tax, but we can't go on running away from that conversation for the next few decades. So I think it's a biggie. It's a big conversation that has to take place. Having said all that, there are many good providers out there. I'd certainly include ourselves in that. There are many providers who will thrive and continue to thrive and do well. But that is based on a mix of private funders as well as local authority funders. For any charity or commercial operator to operate, they're still working with a two-tier system of funding. And that's why I think the DILNOT recommendations of 2015 were right. They were the pinnacle of a lot of debate around a model that I think was fair. And it's just regretful that we didn't implement in the end. But I can't see how you can go back. I think you do have to go back, rather, because I think you're still going to end up a model where you're expecting everybody to pay for their care, but it is capped. I can't see how you can not achieve. I can't see what else you can do, because the cost of care is going up and up.
Yeah. And it's a can that we can't keep kicking down the road.
No, I mean, everybody talks about increasing numbers of dementias, but we're all living longer. And I think the complexity of somebody's care needs in their 80s and 90s. And one of the things about RMBI Care Code, which is not unique, is that the average age of admission now is over 90. I've got over 30 people today in our care homes, over 100. Wow. And I think we haven't talked today in this interview, but I think all debates about choice, a control that people want of their lives. You need a spectrum of retirement communities. You do need care homes for predominantly more for end-of-life care. But it's there is a big array of providers out there. But the challenges aren't going to diminish. And I guess my ultimate fear is that you are moving towards this two-tier structure of care now, based on the haves and the have-nots. I mean, certainly, local authorities are cash-strapped in what they can afford to fund, and that's reflective in the market now in terms of the fee for proper dementia care is well over £1,000 now, I would suggest, for any provider, which is way above what a local authority will pay.
Almost double, isn't it? Typically, depending on which local authority you're talking to, it's not a small amount of money, is it? By
no, and I'm being fair to local authorities. I mean, I think they particularly some of the regions where with a high age profile. I mean, they have an impossible position. They're in an impossible position as commissioners. How do they commission care? I think the other trend that's emerging is that more people have been kept at home.
Yeah.
I think there's far greater debate around domiciliary care now, around people with no capacity still living at home and the consequences of that. And what we haven't talked about today, I think for anybody, it is a complete maze if you're trying to place a loved one into care now. And I'm talking as somebody, as a son who did it a few years ago. I realised I knew absolutely nothing until it came to placing my mother into a care home facility. So I think there's a message there about how easy are we making it. Do people understand the funding of care? Probably not in many cases. And do they understand that the choice they have? So I think there is a whole debate about how you promote the social care sector. I don't know how you can deal with that though, because you've got so many providers. I don't know how you achieve that.
Yeah, it's definitely definitely a difficult one. I feel like there's the origins of another podcast coming along.
Oh yes, yeah.
Conversation. So we'll have to make sure that we introduce kind of some of these open loop discussions maybe a little bit further on down the line. But yeah, definitely important conversations to be had for sure. Do you so as an operator, so looking at the implications of COVID, the economic implications of all of this set of circumstances as well, what are going to be the top 3 permanent changes that you're going to be making organizationally? And that was just a quick shout to Dan Blake of the COO at Florence who asked that question.
I think it's a really good question, and the truth is, I probably don't know the answer yet. I think I know what the answer is, but there may be other answers that emerge in the coming months. But I think adequate resources is the easy one. You've got to have adequate resources. I'm talking about PPE primarily, and be prepared for the future. So the pre-planning is critical. I think how we communicate is number 2 for me. And I mean communicate with commissioners, families, the regulator, how we actually communicate internally with our staff. I think there's an opportunity to take stock about communication and about how we get our message across about, as a provider, what we are providing. But I think my earlier comment about resetting the button and actually looking at how we work together is a wonderful opportunity if we can take that. And I think ultimately it's about how we can improve how we work with people who come into our care as residents and their families, and what learnings are there we can take out of this crisis. God forbid, what if this happens again? So I think it's how we work with families around how we provide that care model, and I hate to say it, how we plan to enable continued contact for as long as possible should we again end up in this situation. But off the cuff, they're probably the things I would immediately say, but there's probably loads of other things that will emerge.
Yeah, maybe we go back and maybe we do this. Maybe we check in with each other, do another podcast in a couple of months, and we'll do kind of a latest state of play type episode and see where we've gone.
I mean, I've not had a chance to say this, but I think the social care sector is a great sector. I think there are amazing people in the sector. I think being a provider is not easy. It takes a lot of skill to be a good provider. But I think if you get it right, the outcomes are fantastic. And I think, let's celebrate the innovation that we've got in our sector, and let's celebrate all the good things that are coming out of this horrible crisis that we're all in at the moment. And let's just look at how we create better services in the future.
Here. Couldn't agree with you more. So I think really what better way to wrap this up on that particular point on a high note. So Mark, it's been great having you on the Care show. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll keep the conversation going, and we'll loop back on this in a few months and see where we are.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you.